What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Modern Warfare. In today's episode, we're finally going to be moving into the marksman rifle category and covering the EBR-14. Now the EBR is a semi-automatic marksman rifle, and it has a base damage profile of 60-52, meaning it has a 2-shot kill potential at all ranges. However, we do deal a little bit less damage to the limbs, and this damage profile is 55-48, and what this means is within the maximum damage range, it doesn't matter if you're shooting them in the limbs or the torso, still going to be a 2-shot kill. However, at longer ranges, if you hit just limb shots, then you won't be getting that 2-shot kill anymore. However, if you do mix a limb shot with a torso shot at those long ranges, you still will be getting that 2-shot kill, so it is very forgiving, and far more often than not, this gun will end up being a 2-shot kill. As for headshots, we get an insane headshot multiplier of 2.75, which takes our headshot damage to 165 up close and 143 at longer ranges, and this means it will always be a 1-shot kill to the head. No matter what range you're in, it will always be a 1-shot kill. As for our rate of fire potential, the EBR is capped fairly low at just under 300 rounds per minute, and this means our theoretical minimum time to kill, assuming you're getting the 2-shot kill, is going to be 202 milliseconds, which is very, very competitive. Just a reminder though, when it comes to our time to kill potential, this is technically 0 milliseconds because you can get that 1-shot kill to the head, which is a massive bonus for this gun. Moving on to ranges, as you can see here, the drop-off point is extremely far away. I actually had to zoom out my standard range map that I typically use for the gun guide series, just so you can see this drop-off point. It's about 65 meters. And it's worth noting that even after that 65-meter range, you're still going to be getting a 2-shot kill unless both of your shots manage to hit them in the arms or the legs. So really, this range drop-off is kind of irrelevant in the first place in most situations, but I do want to be clear, it is possible to get a 3-shot kill beyond 65 meters if you're only hitting them in the limbs. As for suppressors, lightweight suppressor will reduce this drop-off point by 25%, and monolithic suppressor will increase this by 7.5%. Also, if it wasn't obvious enough, in hardcore game modes, this gun is always going to be a 1-shot kill, even if you're shooting through most cover, just because it deals so much damage per shot. Having a look at our hipfire, this is standard for the marksman rifle category, and it's not really that great. It's not nearly as good as the assault rifles or SMGs, for instance, but it is equal to all of the other marksman rifles. As for idle sway, there is a little bit of movement, a little bit of sway, but it is fairly slow moving, and therefore not really a huge concern. However, this can definitely impact your ability to maybe line up that perfect headshot at really long ranges. This brings us into recoil, and as you can see here, it does jump up a little bit initially, but it doesn't really have a high magnitude of recoil. It controls itself pretty well. The big thing you have to be worried about though is the gap between the first and the second shot. There does tend to be a pretty big gap here most of the time, and this means at mid to somewhat longer ranges, unless you're aiming for that perfect headshot, you typically want to aim a bit lower on the torso so that your second shot won't be going over their head. After that second shot though, things are very easily controlled. Getting into some handling stats, our aim down sight time is a little bit on the slow side at 317 milliseconds. It is slower than most of the assault rifles, for instance, but we can improve that with some attachments we'll look at in a little bit. And our sprint out times are actually the same as the assault rifles in this game, which was a little bit surprising. I thought the sprint out time would be a bit worse than it is, but it's pretty good for a marksman rifle. Our magazine capacity is just 10 rounds with 20 in reserve, so this is one of the downsides to this gun. It doesn't have massive magazines or a ton of ammo. However, our reload add time is very fast at just 1.34 seconds. A lot of guns require sleight of hand to reload this fast, so that's very solid. However, if you wanted to go even faster with this, you could use sleight of hand, which will cut this down to 0.87 seconds, which is nearly instant for a reload. Getting into movement speed, this is pretty good for a marksman rifle at 94%. This is roughly equal to the average assault rifle in the game. And same thing goes with our aim down sight stray speed. It's a bit on the slow side at 42.5%, but this is pretty much in line with a bunch of the assault rifles in the game. And that covers all of the important base stats of the EBR-14. However, it does have some unique attachments, and some very unique attachments that I want to have a look at before we get into some great attachment combinations and example class setups. Let's kick it off with the barrels, and the first barrel attachment we have access to is the Forged Tack Precision 20-inch barrel, and with this one we get a 20% increase to our damage range, which honestly is kind of irrelevant with this gun. This isn't something that really matters because even at extremely long ranges, you're still going to be getting a 2-shot kill more often than not. So it's not necessary at all, but it also does improve your bullet velocity, which could be helpful in those long-range situations against people that are moving. And also, it improves our recoil control, which if we have a look and compare it right here, it's not really a super noticeable difference by any means. You've still got that pretty big gap between the first and second shot, and that's the stuff that really matters. So honestly, I don't really see this barrel helping too much in this area. As for the downsides to this barrel, it does add 1 frame to our aim down sight time, so it's now 334 milliseconds, which isn't very nice because it's already a little bit on the slow side, so making it any slower than it already is kinda sucks. And on top of that, our overall movement speed is reduced by roughly 1%, which isn't so bad. It's hardly noticeable for the average player. This brings us to the next barrel, which is the Forged Tack Elite barrel, and with this one we get an improvement to our aim down sight time. This actually increases your aim down sight speed by 2 frames, which is great. This now brings it more in line with a bunch of the assault rifles in this game and makes it much more competitive for moving around. However, this does come at the cost of bullet velocity, which, as we know now, this also means it actually reduces our range value, and in this case, it's by 10%. Again though, I just want to go back and state, the range value doesn't really matter with this gun, so I really don't mind reducing the range on this, because even at really long ranges, you're still getting a 2-shot kill in the vast majority of situations. As a result, I really do like using this barrel on the EBR, because it does help quite a bit with that aim down sight time. So finally for barrels, we have the Forged Tack Precision 22-inch barrel, and with this one we get a 30% increase to our damage range, which sounds great on paper, but again, range is kind of irrelevant with this gun. Our bullet velocity is also improved, which is great for hitting those moving targets at longer ranges. And once again, it states that it helps with your recoil control, and with this one, it looks like it maybe helps a little bit more than the 20-inch barrel, but really, again, it doesn't seem to make a proper noticeable difference in this area, and therefore, just like with the 20-inch version of this barrel, the stated upsides sound much better on paper than they do in practice. As for the downsides, these are very real, and we get the same aim down sight time as with the 20-inch barrel, which is 334 milliseconds, or 1 frame slower than the base, and our movement speed is reduced by 2% with this particular barrel. Overall, I wouldn't recommend it. So moving on to the next set of attachments that are unique to the EBR, these are actually in the stock category, and the first one is the FSS Raider Chassis Pro. With this one, we get a pretty good improvement to our aim down sight speed. This is going to be 2 frames faster, or 284 milliseconds, which is awesome. And on top of that, our aim down sight stray speed is improved by roughly 10%, which is a great boost. This just comes at the cost of aiming stability, which can further harm your ability to hit those really precise headshots at longer ranges, but aside from that, it's not so bad. As for the next one in this category, we have the Elite Chassis, and with this one, once again, we get the same improvement to our aim down sight time, so it'll be 284 milliseconds, and we get a little bit of a better boost to our aim down sight stray speed. This is roughly 13% faster rather than 10, and it also states that it helps with your sprint out time. However, in my testing, there is no measurable change here. I tested this several times, and not once did I get a result that was faster than the base sprint out time. Now these benefits once again come at the cost of aiming stability and also your aim walking steadiness, which is just your aiming stability while in motion. Overall though, both of these attachments are pretty solid choices. But moving on to the final attachments that are unique to the EBR, these are the extended mag attachments, and first up we have the 15 round extended mags, which state that they reduce your aim down sight speed, which, based on my testing, this has no measurable change to your aim down sight time at 60 FPS, so it's not really something you have to worry about. However, it does reduce your overall movement speed by about 2%. We see a really similar story with the 20 round extended mags. This one, once again, has no measurable impact to your aim down sight speed. However, it does reduce your movement speed by 3%, so a little bit slower than the 15 round mags. So that's it for the unique attachments on the EBR. Finally, we can move into some great attachment combinations and example class setups. And the first one here is great if you want to be a bit more aggressive as well as stealthy. And with this, we've got that Forged Tack Elite barrel, which helps with our aim down sight time. And it doesn't really matter that we lose range on that. Also, this is the only time I have ever recommended using a lightweight suppressor, And the reason for this is normally it's a big deal to be reducing your ranges by 25%, but with the EBR it doesn't really matter all that much, and therefore we don't have to sacrifice our aim down sight time, which we would have to do if we were using the monolithic suppressor. So we've also got the lightweight suppressor on here. For our optic, we've got a GI mini reflex. I'm not a huge fan of the iron sights on this gun, so I tend to run with a reflex of some sort. Our stock is going to be the Chassis Pro to help with our aim down sight time as much as possible. And we've also got the 15 round magazine just so we don't have to reload quite as often as we're trying to be aggressive and up in the enemy's face. For those curious, the aim down sight on this particular attachment combination will be 284 milliseconds. That's just how everything balances out with the various attachments, which is good enough if you want to be a little bit aggressive. Now, taking that into an example class setup, this is going to be a stealth setup. So we've got a pistol with a suppressor on there. You could honestly use whatever. I've got the X16 though. Also, we've got EOD on there, Ghost, of course, for our stealthy setup, and Tracker, just to mix things up a little bit. I don't use Tracker often enough, and I don't recommend it often enough, so I am going to recommend it here. As for our lethal, we've got a C4, and our tactical is a stim shot. This setup is pretty solid for just roaming around and picking people off, trying to stay off the radar. And I find even in face-to-face gunfights, this thing absolutely holds its own as long as you're hitting your shots. So that's the first setup. Now I want to move into the second setup, and this one's designed more for the proper marksman rifle sort of a playstyle where you're hanging back a bit more and picking people off. It's not necessarily designed for super aggressive playstyles. So with this one, we've got the compensator combined with the Merc foregrip, and the reason for this is both of these help with recoil control, which tends to be your vertical recoil, and this significantly cuts down that gap between the first and second shot, and therefore at longer ranges, you can hit those two shots a lot more precisely, which is great. On top of that, we've got the 20 round magazine, just because with this, we can go on longer streaks, and therefore we want more total starting ammo, and a greater magazine capacity on top of that is just fine. Once again, we are using the GI Mini Reflex just because that's my preferred reflex sight. However, any sight that you're comfortable with would fit in just fine here. And finally, we have the tack laser on this. Now, the reason we're using the tack laser is, first off, it helps with our aim down sight time, so it actually perfectly offsets all of the other attachments that reduce your aim down sight time, and it effectively cancels it out. We get an aim down sight time with this setup of 317 milliseconds, which is the same as the base for this gun. And the reason we're using the tack laser rather than some of the other attachments that help with aim down sight time is it also helps with aiming steadiness, whereas a lot of the other ones hurt your aiming steadiness, and we don't want to do that for those long range shots. This allows you to be a bit more confident at picking off those headshots at really long ranges. So this is why this setup is excellent for picking people off at range. As for an example class setup using this attachment combination, we've got the Desert Eagle as our secondary, EOD as perk 1, Kill Chain as perk 2 because I like picking people off, getting my streaks up, and then letting those streaks get more streaks. And finally, we have Shrapnel combined with Thermite because I really like using this setup in ground war, and that's excellent for taking out tanks. This just leaves us with our tactical, which is once again a stim shot. I really like the stim shot in this game, so I use it on most of my class setups. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's gun guide on the EBR-14. As for my thoughts on this gun, I think it's actually fairly underrated. This gun has a ton of potential. If you're just hitting those body shots, you've got a very competitive time to kill. However, you also have the ability to go for those really precise headshots for the instant kill. As a result, if you haven't really spent much time with the EBR-14, I highly recommend you give it a shot, and you just might fall in love with it. But of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think of the EBR-14? Do you think it's a good gun, bad gun, somewhere in between? Also, which gun would you like me to cover next for this series? Keeping in mind, I have already covered all of the assault rifles and SMGs. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.